Hello, Skull here. Welcome to episode 3 of the Crown of the Kobold King Campaign Diary. That's a lot of C's and K's. Our heroes have entered the Ruined Monastery and officially began the dungeon crawl. So this session had a lot of combat, a lot of looting, and a few hazards. The trial by fire combat from last session seems to have given them the grips of Pathfinder combat, although there are a few encounters that still left them all kinds of bewildered this session. I don't really have any preamble for this episode, so aside from reminding you to like and subscribe and comment, I think we can just get straight into it. When we left off, Dr. Flintgaze and Trout had disturbed the 3 dwarven skeletons in the secret prison and combat had begun. Scraps out in the hallway heard the commotion and rushed into the room. He cast Timber and began the assault on the risen dead. Timber seems to be becoming his signature attack, as it's kind of what he defaults to, which is interesting, because it's not the strongest of his spells. Meanwhile, Groovus, who had also been waiting in the corridor, moved into the armory and readied an attack on anyone who entered the room. The skeletons stumbled forwards and clawed at our heroes, or fired arrows from the cells. Our heroes avoided the assault and then retaliated. Flintgaze used his pistol to shatter a skeleton with a critical hit from his clan pistol. As the gunshot echoed throughout the hillside, it awoke the wolves and Girdlecap. However, they held back for now, both for balance reasons, but also to assess the party before striking. Trout tried to follow suit, but his own shot was resisted by the skeleton. Instead, he readied an action to punch the skeleton should it close the distance on him. As it happens, it did step forwards, and Trout's fist critically hit, smashing the skeleton into tiny bone chips. Scraps finished off the final skeleton by casting Scatter Scree and showering the skeleton in a shotgun blast of small stone pellets from the crumbling walls. Scraps was a little freaked out by the strange hidden prison.
Guys, I don't want to say anything too ominous, but there's 4 cells here and there's 4 of us.
Coincidence, I'm sure.
Hmm.
But this place is ancient. It wasn't built for us.
I'm still scared.
No, don't worry. I don't think they have a bone to pick with us.
Before exiting the prison, Flintgaze noticed that one of the dead dwarves had not risen. He saw the shine of a piece of jewelry and stepped into the cell to give it a closer look. This item is a ring of Torag. This dwarf had remained loyal to Torag until the very end, and this divine loyalty had kept her from rising as an undead with the others. Dr. Flintgaze took the ring, but he doesn't know yet that it is magical or what it can do. The group moved up to the next door. Groovus checked the handle to see if it was unlocked. Upon seeing it was, he kicked the door open and revealed the wolf den. This small study looks like it has been lived in recently. Gnawed bones litter the floor, and tufts of grey fur lie scattered here and there. An old stone desk sits at the center of the chamber, scratched and cracked in many places. The stench of wet fur hangs heavy in the air. The gunshots from the previous battle had already woken up the wolves, and as soon as the door opened, they lunged forwards and combat began. As well as the threat of 2 hungry wolves, the kobold Girdlecap had also been alerted. And he waited around a nearby corner, ready to strike once our heroes were preoccupied with the beasts. The inclusion of Girdlecap did knock the fight into extreme difficulty, but I had plans for if the party got overwhelmed. Essentially, Girdlecap was going to use ambushes and hit-and-run tactics to target an isolated hero, and if he managed to down them, he'd drag them away for questioning. As simple-minded beasts, I purposely made suboptimal choices with the wolves, such as attacking around cover rather than moving to somewhere without cover, or just attacking the nearest target instead of flanking or spreading the threat. The wolves bit and nipped at Groovus, who blocked their path out of the room, and in response, Scraps moved closer, positioning himself as the nearest hero to Girdlecap. He began blasting the wolves with spells before the undetected kobold sunk a dagger into his back and darted away. This continued for a couple of rounds. The group would attack the wolves with weapons and spells, and Girdlecap would stab at Scraps before disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Eventually, Dr. Flintgaze took up this dangerous location and began taking these ambush attacks instead. This scenario eventually led to Groovus and Flintgaze being pretty injured. Scraps used Protector Tree to give the group some much-needed time from the wolves' attacks. This gave our heroes the time they needed to finally demoralize and kill the 2 wolves. Now that their initial targets were dead, the group turned their attention to Girdlecap. Scraps began using scatterscree to cause difficult terrain that repeatedly stopped Girdlecap from retreating once he'd engaged, and this was disastrous for the kobold. No longer able to hit and run, suddenly he was forced to face the entire party on equal footing, and as he desperately tried to retreat back to his room, our heroes cut him down. The group returned to the wolf den and began to look around. As they rooted through the old desk, Trout and Scraps came across a secret drawer. They scooped up all the loot within and handed the +1 hatchet to Trout, who had been using his fists for melee up until now. The group wanted to rest and heal up, so they dragged all the corpses into the wolf den and then returned to the secret prison to rest. Despite Greypelt definitely having heard the attack, he didn't launch his attack on the group while they rested. The in-world reasoning is that he had heard the fight and was nervous to attack alone, but the mechanical reasons was, of course, this would have been a terribly difficult fight if I had done that. So they rested and healed up without issue, and soon they were ready to continue on their exploration. By the time they had made a move, it had gotten pretty late, so the sun had set. However, with 3 goblins and a dwarf, seeing in the dark isn't exactly an issue for them. They gathered around the door to Greypelt's chamber, and once they were ready, they opened the door. Faint light enters this chamber from gaping holes in the roof. One of the stone columns that once supported the ceiling has toppled, its broken pieces littering the floor. A thick patch of black mushrooms hides in the nearby corner, giving the room an earthy scent that's barely noticeable above the stench of wet fur. Greypelt, the cunning warg, had heard the disturbance of the previous battles and had been waiting for them. Favoring self-preservation, it chose not to immediately attack. Instead, it stood atop the pillar and stared at them cautiously. Our heroes seemed very hesitant to deal with Greypelt. They began to slowly close the door and ignore the threat. They wanted to push the large stone desk against it to block it in, but as Greypelt saw them closing the door, he frustratedly spoke. He's aware that the unexpected ability to speak often throws off humanoids, so he would have preferred to have a grander reveal. Instead, he kind of panicked and told them to halt. As you start to close the door, you hear a halt.
Pause as if you listened, and then continue to slowly close it.
No, I'm gonna not close the door. He said halt. When a wolf thing says halt, you halt.
Oh dear.
Okay, it slowly prowls down from the top of this collapsed pillar and approaches a little bit. What are your intentions here?
Our intentions? We're hunting kobolds.
Then why are my wolves dead?
They attacked us. That's what happens.
Self-defense.
They weren't as reasonable as you are.
Wouldn't you kill us if we attacked you first?
You see, it stops and thinks for a second, then has like a, oh yeah, kind of response. There's a lot of ways this conversation can go. Greypelt would rather not fight, but he will do so if the party are eager to attack, and since 3 of our heroes were specifically here to kill Greypelt, I had expected a fight to break out. When Dr. Flintgaze said they were here for kobolds, it kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. Typically, Greypelt will let the heroes leave after a short conversation. Depending on their starter quest, he might even let them achieve it. But Greypelt is an ally of the kobolds and is not willing to let the party below. Luckily, he quickly realized that the group doesn't actually know where the kobolds are and decided to simply send them away. I suggest you leave, while I'm willing to let you.
This is your territory?
Yes.
You associated with the kobolds at all?
Not particularly. He lied. Groovus suddenly realized that this creature they're talking to might be the one that's their target.
I'm going to whisper to the dog that's not the wolf that's laying traps, right?
No, surely. That would have been a smart wolf. This guy is clearly, Wait, he's talking.
Quick, check
This guy's clearly an idiot. Wait, he's speaking.
Check for traps. See if he's been setting any up.
You wouldn't happen to be prowling about laying traps for loggers, would you?
What concern is it of yours if I kill hunters and loggers?
I would like to use some deception here. Well, frankly, they've been bastards to me all life. I'm just happy someone is giving it to them finally.
Okay, make a deception. Good. This is why I let you leave alive. Do not return. With that, the group complied. They closed the door and backed out. They mentioned that Greypelt was a lot scarier than they had anticipated and wanted to return at a later time when they were all at full strength. This is a pretty good idea, and if they think about rolling some recall knowledge checks, then it could also provide an advantage in the fight. For now, though, they began to explore the southern rooms. They begun with the waiting room. A long dead dwarf lies slumped on the floor in the middle of this dark, dusty room. Flintgaze scanned the room and noticed that the body was mummified. It had a broken vial in one hand and a scrap of paper in the other, as well as a silver clan dagger that was emblazoned with Droskar symbology. Flintgaze headed over and read the note. "Forgive me, true father of the forge, for my toils were not enough." He took the clan dagger, wondering if there's some kind of cultural implication for recovering a forgotten clan dagger. Kind of like recovering the dog tags of a fallen soldier. Next, the group checked out the cloakroom. This small chamber was once used to store the traveling cloaks, coats, and hats of visitors to the monastery. Now, only a few moth-eaten rags hang on the pegs, while a single soiled hat rests on the table. There's nothing of note in this room unless your party is seeking mushrooms, so they just moved on. They moved down to the next door and prepared to move in. They tried the door, but Gertelkep had locked it before heading out to fight the party. In hindsight, I probably should have placed a key on Gertelkep for them to find, but it kind of slipped my mind in the moment. He did have some thieves' tools on him, so I guess he used them to lock and unlock the door. Upon finding the locked door, Groovus, Flintgaze, and Trout all attempted to pick the lock, but after several failed attempts, they gave up and swapped to the door behind them. This one was unlocked and led into the ruined library. The double door leading into this chamber is shattered and broken, one of them lying on the floor. The room beyond lies in an equal state of disrepair. What was once a library is now a shattered mess, with one corner being completely collapsed and soaked in a large pool of stagnant water. Thick fungus grows on most of the remaining books on the shelves, lining the walls. The group moved into the room and noticed the door leading to the northern room. While the others planned their entrance into the next room, Dr. Flintgaze scanned the bookshelves for recoverable books. While he looked around, Scraps asked him about the gods associated with this place.
Is there anything to do with your Torag, was it? Here?
Probably. Or not, I don't think so. Most of the worship here is for Droskar now. Or were.
Let's
Torag's a
teach
good
them
one.
about the bad habits of Torag, maybe?
No. Torag's a good god. He doesn't have any bad habits.
Sorry.
Droskar, though.
Misinformation.
No, he's an asshole.
Droskar.
Yeah. He likes to enslave people. Your worship to him is working yourself to death.
Isn't that what we're doing right now? Working
Working ourselves to
to
death?
death?
No. Not that kind of toil. I mean, toiling away with your crafts until you die.
Oh. No
In his
freedom
service.
then.
No freedom. Mining and smithing and such. It's bad news.
We'll steer clear of this Droskar guy.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Dr. Flintgaze couldn't find any books that had survived the mold, and as he disturbed the shelves, horrid spores spread throughout the area. I had him pick a bookshelf to act as the origin of the hazard, although he didn't know that was why he was choosing at the time. The spores of the phantom mold spread out, and Flintgaze, Traps, and Trout were all affected. They rolled a Fortitude saving throw, and while Flintgaze fully resisted it, the two goblins were sent into a coughing fit. Scraps went to stage 1 and Trout began at stage 2. Poison went to work on their bodies, chipping away at their health steadily. Side note that this was the first damage that Trout had taken in the entire adventure. Each round, they rolled again to see how their bodies handled the poison. Scraps successfully fought off the ailment, while Trout reduced it to stage 1, taking additional poison damage. He made another save, but a failure sent him back to stage 2, and poison continued to wreck his health. At this point, Dr. Flintgaze moved forward in an attempt to battle medicine, as Trout was nearing death's door. Unfortunately,
I don't want to get close. If I go close, does it get me as well?
you hurt him.
Oh
You
my
take 5
god!
points of damage.
Okay.
How many Lewis, if this
As Trout slumped to the ground unconscious, Agruvus rushed over and fed him a potion that brought him back from death. He had one final Fortitude saving throw to make, and a failure left him pretty damaged and suffering from a -2 to perception checks for the next hour.
Well, you're right. That was One sick coughing fit.
No.
Never had any mold in your lungs before, eh?
We gave you a book. Why wasn't that enough?
What?
Scraps took a nervous look around, scared for additional dangers. However, he did end up seeing the lone, undamaged book atop one of the shelves.
Hey, Doctor, what about this book over here? Was
Hmm?
it books you called them? The paper squares?
Yeah.
There's one over here.
Wait,
look.
Scraps. You telling me
Yeah.
you don't know what a book is?
But no, these? Well, I guess I do now, but not before. No.
We're gonna have a talk about this later.
Okay. I'm gonna point the book out.
Fearing the climb over mouldy books, Scraps hopped onto Flintgaze's shoulders, and together their combined height was enough to grab the tome called Torag O Torag, which was a book of old dwarven hymns, and within the pages was a scroll of spiritual weapon.
You know, Scraps, you got a good eye on you.
Thanks, boss. I'm used to looking for things sometimes, I guess.
I can tell. You got a scavenger's eye.
Yeah, it's the way I was brought up by myself, I guess.
Is that what you got that chest around with you? For all your scraps?
Yeah, it's for bits and bobs and stuff. It helps me out occasionally as well.
Helps you out.
Yeah, yeah. You'll see.
Alright. Well, yeah, that'll be interesting to see for sure.
Ooh, a tease from the summoner who is yet to do any summoning. After jamming another potion into Trout, they took a look into the desecrated shrine. Darkwood pews lie tipped over and covered in dust on either side of this ancient shrine. At the far end sits a large ceremonial anvil, but its surface is defaced and ruined. This room contains 2 dark mantles that hang from the ceiling. As this is very much a man-made room, their attempts to hide the stalactites is pretty ineffective, and immediately our heroes became suspicious of them. They checked for traps and found none. They were very hesitant to enter, but eventually they did shuffle into the room. They checked out the shrine, noticing that the 5 gemstones were missing, and identifying it as an item of devotion to Torag, although it had been heavily defaced. As they neared the center of the room, the dark mantles struck. One of them launched a globule of magical darkness that covered the entire party, and combat began. Despite how far they've come in such a short time, the darkness effect from the dark mantles completely overwhelmed them. The sheer confusion of the situation led to near immediate retreat as Trout fled straight back into the library. He wanted to ready an action to attack anything that revealed itself, but quickly realized he couldn't see through the darkness. Before the others had a chance to join the retreat, the dark mantles struck, flying down from the ceiling and attacking with their barbed tentacles. Grievous was one of the Dark Mantle's victims and decided that while he knew where one was, he would grapple it and hold it in place for the others, lest it move away and be completely lost in the darkness. He was successful and held the creature in place as he slashed at it. With only 20 hit points and no resistances, the Dark Mantles are not especially hard to kill. However, the panic that the darkness causes makes them very good at demoralizing the players, not just their characters. Flat checks and the enemy being such an unknown threat gives them so much power in the mental game. So when Grievous nearly halved the creature's health in one attack, it didn't actually sway the party's confidence. Losing his ability to see proved scary enough for Scraps to finally call forth his Eidolon. With a screams of Tiefs, the chest that he had been dragging around lurched to life. Flintgaze thought that light might be able to break through the darkness, so he used his turn lighting a torch. Unfortunately, the Dark Mantle's darkness fully suppresses all non-magical lights and magical lights of 1st rank or lower, so while he could feel the torch's heat, it wasn't providing any help with the darkness. The other Dark Mantle went for the newly summoned Eidolon and began whipping and grappling at it. Trout was the only one of our heroes not in the darkness and began firing his pistol into the void to little effect. Things took a turn for the worse as the Dark Mantles continued to overwhelm the group in the darkness. Grievous went down to a critical hit as Scraps and Tiefs battled with the other. The party began to retreat, and Flintgaze grabbed the unconscious Grievous and dragged him out of the room. This left Scraps and Tiefs alone with the monsters. The Dark Mantles both converged on the pair while the rest of the party worried over Grievous. Since Tiefs was grappled and couldn't flee, Scraps ran through the door, closed it, and left his Eidolon behind. Not long after that, the Dark Mantles ripped through Tiefs, leaving Scraps dying as well. And as the 2 goblins lay dying on the floor, that's where we ended the session. So, my thoughts on this adventure so far. This first chunk of the dungeon crawl feels very tight, even though I made several rooms larger than they were supposed to be. You can kind of explain away why all the enemies aren't converging on the heroes as soon as one fight breaks out, but it certainly still feels like a meta choice not doing that. The encounters do manage to remain interesting, despite being pretty simple in their setup. Girdle-Kep's hit-and-run combat made them use spells in a strategic way, and the Dark Mantles had such a clear advantage in the mental games that it offset their relative ease to kill. There's plenty of interesting and thematic loot to find, although some of it is mechanically useless in this adventure. Having a dwarf in the party is definitely a boon, as it means that there's someone to care about what is happening here, and it makes this place more than just a generic dungeon. As for the way I've been running the adventure, clearly my group is looking for a more comedic experience than I typically try to provide. I usually run a quite serious game, and the moments of silliness and comedy are sprinkled through as a emotional reset for the players. However, this group have basically giggled their way through the game, so I'm going to have to match that energy. I think I basically need to add a hint of stupidity and slapstick to the game, as that's what they respond well to. They want to laugh at someone, whether that's each other's misfortune or an NPC. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how the game is going. I'm excited to see how things escalate once they descend below into the real dungeon. Thank you so much for watching. We've stagnated a bit in growth on this channel recently. I love making campaign diaries, but they aren't a very common content type, so not many people are looking for them in order to find these videos. Any support you can provide, such as liking, commenting, or sharing this channel with fellow GMs, can go such a long way in order to helping this channel grow and ensuring that I can continue to improve the quality of these videos. Thank you so much for all of your support, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.